Welcome to Scrum Guide Expanded, Key Concepts and Vocabulary.
From product to output, we drive outcomes and impact, mapping true value to continuous learning.
In this video, we go beyond the core wording of the Scrum Guide to explore the expanded terminology and concepts introduced through the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack, or SGEP, and the Scrum Guide Expansion, or SGE. The objective is not simply to learn more terms, but to understand how these concepts connect. Our learning thread moves from product, to output, to outcome, to impact, to value, and ultimately to learning. This progression helps us see Scrum not merely as a framework for producing increments, but as a system for creating meaningful value through continuous learning and adaptation. Let's now unpack the key concepts and vocabulary behind this expanded view of Scrum. The product begins with a problem or opportunity. It is not simply the thing we build, it is the vehicle through which value is created. In the expanded view, a product can take many forms: a service, physical or digital product, hybrid product, platform, or even a holistic experience. The important shift is from asking only, "What are we building?" to asking, "What problem or opportunity are we addressing, who is affected, and what value are we creating?" This connects the product with its wider ecosystem of stakeholders and users and, ultimately, with the value they realize. So, the product is not the end in itself. It is the manifestation of why we do what we do. Product vision provides the long-term direction. It describes where we ultimately want the product to go and gives the product effort an overarching sense of purpose. Product goal translates that direction into a medium-term target. It defines the product objective we are currently pursuing and provides a clear focus for the product backlog. Sprint goal then brings that focus into the near term. It expresses what the Scrum team intends to achieve in the sprint and guides its empirical action. Together, they form a hierarchy of intent. Product vision provides direction, product goal provides target focus, and sprint goal drives near-term action. This creates a clear connection between where we want to go, what we are pursuing now, and what we are trying to achieve in the current sprint. A product developer is much broader than someone who simply writes code. In Scrum, the accountability is for possessing the capabilities needed to create usable increments. These capabilities may include research, discovery, design, creation, testing, inspection, adaptation, and validation. The important perspective shift is from asking, "Who writes the code?" to asking, "Who collectively possesses the capabilities needed to create and evolve the product?" These capabilities may be performed by humans, supported by automation, or increasingly augmented by AI and other technologies. However, the accountability remains grounded in the Scrum team, with at least one human product developer present. So, product developer is best understood as an accountability centered on product creation and evolution, rather than a narrow job title or coding function. As we move from the capabilities within the Scrum team to the environment around it, we also need to recognize the people who influence that environment. Supporters are stakeholders and change agents who help create the conditions in which Scrum teams can thrive. They may come from management, HR, finance, legal and governance, security and compliance, procurement, or other organizational functions. Their role is to enable and support the Scrum team by influencing workflows, policies, and the broader environment to remove barriers. However, supporters do not become a formal Scrum accountability simply because they support the team. Their importance lies in their systemic influence. Scrum teams operate within an organizational system that can either enable or constrain their effectiveness. With the product, direction, developers, and supporting environment now in view, we can next examine how these elements connect to the actual flow of work and value. Now that we have considered the environment that enables Scrum teams, we can turn to the quality of what they actually produce. The increment is the deliverable asset, but producing an increment is not enough by itself. The definition of output done makes the quality expectations for that output explicit. It describes the technical standards, product qualities, and due diligence required for the increment to be delivered safely and appropriately. This creates an important distinction between the overall quality standard for the increment and the acceptance criteria of individual product backlog items. The definition of output done applies across the increment. It does not replace the specific acceptance criteria for individual items. So the central question becomes, have we produced the increment to the required quality standard? With output quality now established, we can move further along the learning thread, from simply producing an output toward understanding whether that output actually creates an outcome and value. We have now reached an important distinction in the learning thread. Producing something is not the same as changing something. Output answers the question, what did we produce? It is the tangible deliverable or feature created by the team. Outcome asks, what changed because of it? It focuses on the change in user behavior or stakeholder experience. Consider the example of an online government portal. Building and releasing the portal is the output. If citizens can then complete a service 50% faster with 0 errors, that improvement represents the outcome. This distinction is critical because even a high-quality output does not guarantee a successful outcome. A feature may satisfy every technical and quality requirement, yet fail if people do not use it or the intended behavior does not materialize. So, the Scrum mindset extends beyond asking whether we delivered something correctly. We also need to learn whether that delivery produced the change we intended. And once that change is understood, the next question is even more important. Did it create meaningful value? We have established that output and outcome are different. The next step is to define what it means for an outcome to be considered complete and supported by evidence. The definition of outcome done operates at the product level rather than simply at the increment level. While the definition of output done focuses on technical quality and compliance, the definition of outcome done focuses on realized benefits and value. This also changes the type of evidence we need. Output done can be supported through verification such as tests and audits. Outcome done requires observable evidence, which may be qualitative or quantitative, showing that the intended change has actually occurred. The key question is therefore not simply, did we produce the increment? But, do we have observable evidence that the intended benefit was actually realized by users? This brings us directly from delivery and outcomes to the next level of the learning thread, understanding value and its actual impact. Now that we have distinguished output from outcome and established how an outcome can be considered done, we can look at how outcome thinking is applied to individual pieces of work. The product backlog item describes what we intend to build. In this example, the item is an online appointment booking system. Acceptance criteria then validate whether the feature works as specified. For example, the form should submit successfully, send a confirmation email, and record the information in the database. Outcome criteria take us one level further. They describe the intended change that the feature is expected to create. In this case, reducing appointment processing time by 40%. This highlights an important distinction. Completing a feature does not mean that the intended outcome has been achieved. Outcome criteria make the purpose of the work visible and give product developers a basis for inspection and adaptation as evidence and learning emerge. From here, we can move beyond individual outcomes and explore how these outcomes contribute to broader value and impact. Now we can extend that chain one step further, from the change experienced by users to the broader impact created for the organization or society. Level 1 is output. What did we produce? In this example, it is a digital payment platform. Level 2 is outcome. What changed for users? Here, the outcome is that more citizens begin using digital payments. Level 3 is impact. What broader result followed from that change? For example, lower processing costs and greater organizational efficiency. The distinction is important. Outcomes confirm that user behavior or experience has changed, while impact looks at the broader results that emerge from those changes. This gives us a useful progression. We produce something that produces a change, and that change can contribute to a broader result. The next question, then, is how these results translate into actual value. We have now connected outputs, outcomes, and impact. The next step is to see how these ideas are anchored through commitments across the Scrum system. The expanded framework introduces 4 artifact commitment relationships. The product is associated with the definition of outcome done, creating a product-level commitment around realized value. The product backlog is connected to the product goal, which provides the commitment to the product objective being pursued. The sprint backlog is connected to the sprint goal, giving the sprint its clear near-term commitment. And the increment is connected to the definition of output done, establishing the quality standard that the delivered output must satisfy. Together, these relationships create a layered commitment structure: outcome at the product level, direction through the product backlog, focus through the sprint backlog, and quality through the increment. This helps us see that Scrum commitments are not isolated statements. They form a connected system linking intent, work, quality, and ultimately value. We have now connected the individual pieces, so we can see the complete product logic as one continuous cycle. It begins with vision and goal, which establish direction. The product backlog and product developers then translate that direction into action and create an increment that meets the definition of output done. But delivery is not the end of the journey. The increment is released and used, allowing us to observe whether the intended outcome criteria are actually being achieved. Outcome done provides evidence that the intended change has occurred. From there, we can assess the resulting value and impact. Finally, inspection and adaptation bring what we have learned back into the system, allowing the product direction and subsequent work to evolve. This is the expanded empirical loop: set direction, build, observe, validate, learn, and adapt. The key idea is that Scrum is not simply a delivery cycle. It is a continuous learning cycle in which delivery generates evidence, evidence informs learning, and learning shapes what happens next. We have now traced the complete product logic, from direction and delivery through outcomes, impact, and learning. So the final question is, what has really changed in the way we think about product work? The first question remains important. Did we produce a quality increment? But that is no longer sufficient. We also need to ask whether the product created the intended outcome and whether that outcome created meaningful value for stakeholders. This leads to the deeper product question: what happened because we built this? That question shifts the focus from simply shipping features to understanding their consequences through evidence. And that is the central paradigm shift in this expanded view of Scrum, moving from delivery-focused thinking toward evidence-informed product thinking, where building something is only the beginning of the learning process. Having seen what has expanded in Scrum, it is equally important to clarify what remains unchanged. The foundation is still empiricism, with transparency, inspection, and adaptation remaining essential to how Scrum works. The Scrum values also remain central: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage continue to guide how the Scrum team works and makes decisions. And the core Scrum artifacts remain fundamental: the product goal, sprint goal, increment, and the product and sprint backlogs continue to provide the structure for organizing and delivering work. So, the important message is that Scrum has not been replaced. The expanded concepts add richer product thinking vocabulary and make the connections between delivery, outcomes, value, and learning more explicit. With that distinction clear, we can now bring the entire learning journey together and see the overall logic of this expanded Scrum perspective. Let's bring these concepts together through a practical public sector example. Imagine a digital citizen service designed to make applications more accessible. The vision and goal are clear: enable citizens to complete the process online. But in the public sector, delivering a working service also requires due diligence. Security, legal compliance, accessibility, data protection, and the involvement of relevant stakeholders must be properly verified before the increment can be considered done. So, the increment must be secure, tested, compliant, and accessible, with the definition of done making these expectations explicit. We then move from output to outcome. Success is demonstrated through evidence. In this case, a 40% reduction in processing time. Finally, we look at impact. The service should reduce administrative burden, while legal, finance, and ICT act as key supporters in enabling that value. So, this case shows how the concepts connect, from vision, through a usable and duly verified increment, to measurable outcomes, and ultimately to public value. This final synthesis brings the expanded product thinking perspective into one simple learning cycle. We begin by building something, but we do not assume that delivery automatically means success. We observe what happens when the product is used, validate the evidence against the outcomes we intended, learn from what that evidence tells us, and then adapt accordingly. That gives us the progression from output, to outcome, to value. What we build matters, what it changes matters more, and what value we ultimately realize matters most. The deeper message is that product development is not simply about producing more outputs. It is about creating a continuous connection between what we build, what changes, what we learn, and the value that results. And that is the essence of the expanded Scrum perspective. Build with purpose, learn from evidence, and continuously adapt toward meaningful value. Version 2.
Welcome to this explainer on the Scrum Guide Expanded, diving into the insights from the expanded Scrum blueprint. We are jumping right in today because we're looking at a massive paradigm shift. The core expectation moving forward is a fundamental, almost radical shift in focus. We're moving away from a culture of mere delivery, just blindly getting features out the door, to a culture of validated value. It's really all about making absolutely sure the hard work we put into building things actually matters in the real world. Notice the progression here. This is the new rhythm of modern Scrum. It's a continuous sequence, moving from product to output to outcome to impact to value and finally all the way to learning. It's this dynamic, continuous flow where actually building the thing is really just the beginning of the journey. Think about it. If we stop at output, we're essentially flying blind. We have to push all the way through to learning. Let's start unpacking this with Section 1, the product foundation. Now, this isn't just a list of new buzzwords to memorize. It is a very deliberate evolution. Notice the precise terminology changes here. We've got specific additions, like the definition of outcome done and this new concept of a supporter. Then we have renamed terms, which make things like output done explicitly tied to the increment. And finally, we have expanded concepts, giving a ton more depth to terms like product and product developer. Understanding this shift in vocabulary is absolutely crucial. It's the very first step in shifting a team's entire mindset. Because, you see, the definition of a product itself has expanded. It's no longer just a physical item or a random piece of software. It is literally the manifestation of why we do what we do. It's a vehicle designed specifically to create continuing value. This pushes teams way past that outdated habit of simply asking, okay, what are we building today? To asking the truly vital question. What problem or opportunity are we actually addressing? Think about a banking app. It isn't just lines of code, it's a vehicle for users' financial security. So how does this actually build into focus? Well, it connects broad direction to near-term action. You start with the expanded product vision, acting as this overarching direction, a really wide lens. This then contrasts against the formal Scrum 2020 commitments that narrow our focus down. The product goal provides a specific objective. And finally, the sprint goal drives immediate near-term action. It's basically a funnel, guiding us from the ultimate why all the way down to the immediate what. Moving right along to Section 2, broadening Scrum roles. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that product development is vastly broader than just coding. It spans the entire spectrum, from discover and research all the way through to validate. Because of that, product developers represent a collective capability and accountability. It's no longer just some narrow job title for an engineer. It's whoever collectively possesses the capabilities needed to create and evolve the product. So, UX researchers, data analysts, and software engineers? In this expanded view, they're all equally product developers.
But those developers don't work in a vacuum. The Scrum team does not operate in isolation. And this brings us to the supporter. Now, to be crystal clear, supporters are not some extra new Scrum role. They are crucial stakeholders and change agents, people in HR, finance, or legal, who actively enable the team by removing systemic barriers. For instance, a supporter in legal might clear up a massive compliance hurdle so the team can actually deploy a feature and thrive, rather than just getting stuck in bureaucratic limbo forever.
Let's dive into Section 3, output versus outcome.
To really understand why perfectly building something just isn't enough anymore, we need to start with the definition of output done. This makes the increment's quality standard completely explicit. When we apply it, we're simply asking, did we build it properly? Does it meet our technical due diligence and our required quality measures? That confirms a quality standard, for sure, but absolutely nothing more. It tells us the code is clean, but it doesn't tell us if the customer actually cares.
And here is why that matters. A quality output absolutely does not guarantee a successful outcome. Let's take a government service rollout as an example. Releasing an online portal securely and perfectly to specification, well, that's a done output. But if citizens don't actually complete their tasks faster and more easily using it, you haven't achieved your outcome. A perfectly secure platform means literally nothing if the users don't achieve their desired result.
Let's put these two right next to each other to really cement the difference. Output is what we produced. Outcome is what changed because of it. It is vital, absolutely crucial that this distinction is fully absorbed. Delivery is the output. Behavior change is the outcome. If we ship a new search bar, hey, that's an output. But if users actually find what they're looking for twice as fast, now that is an outcome. We can actually trace these three connected levels of value as they ripple outward. At the base, level 1 is output, say producing a digital payment platform. That expands outward to level 2, outcome, meaning more citizens are actually choosing to pay digitally, which finally expands to level 3, impact, the broader organizational result like dramatically lower transaction costs and improved service efficiency for the whole agency. Every single level depends entirely on the success of the one right before it. To manage all this practically on a day-to-day basis, we have to clearly separate acceptance criteria from outcome criteria. Acceptance criteria simply ask if the output works. Did the confirmation email send? Outcome criteria, however, introduce the why and ask what change is intended. Did we actually reduce appointment processing time by 20%? Ultimately, feature completion never equals outcome achievement. We've got to measure the behavioral change, not just celebrate the technical completion. Which brings us to Section 4, Expanded Commitment Architecture. All right, take a look at this expanded architecture. You're going to want to notice the crucial new addition, the explicit product-level commitment known as the definition of outcome done. It sits right alongside the retained 2020 goals and the explicitly renamed definition of output done, creating 4 very clear artifact commitment relationships. It creates this beautiful, balanced ecosystem where technical quality and real-world value are equally respected and tracked. So, this definition of outcome done, it's all about realizing value. The ultimate question we're asking is, do we have evidence that the intended benefit was realized? It demands observable, real-world evidence, like tracking a processing time metric to ensure it actually drops, to definitively prove that value materialized. Without that hard evidence, let's be honest, we're just guessing. And all of this comes together to form the complete product's logic. We are officially breaking free from that old linear trap of plan, build, finish. Instead, we're moving into a continuous loop because true product development requires continuous, evidence-based observation and adaptation. We can't just drop a feature over the wall and immediately move on to the next one anymore. We have to stay with it to ensure it actually works for the user. This continuous loop literally becomes the new cadence of true product development. You set the direction, you build the increment, you release it to observe its use, you validate it against your outcome criteria, you learn from that observable evidence, and then you adapt. Over and over and over again. This isn't just a process tweak, it's a fundamental mindset of relentless curiosity and improvement. Let's make this real. Section 5, putting it into practice. Let's trace the golden thread of a digital public service to see how this works in the wild. We start broad at the top with the product vision and goal to enable online service completion. Then we move down to the sprint goal, delivering a working digital service that meets that output done standard. But the thread doesn't stop there. We use outcome criteria to achieve outcome done, proving that processing time actually went down, which ultimately validates the true impact we were after, a much lower administrative burden and a profoundly better experience for the citizen. Now, for all the veteran practitioners out there watching, don't worry, Scrum is still Scrum. The unbreakable core of empiricism, transparency, inspection, adaptation, and the Scrum values, all of that remains totally intact. Scrum hasn't been replaced, it has simply been elaborated and extended for modern product thinking. We're just expanding our definition of what success looks like. Which brings us to a really powerful final synthesis.
So, the journey is simple. Build, observe, validate, learn, adapt. Because what we build matters, but what it changes matters more, and the value we ultimately realize matters most. If this episode helped you understand the evolving vocabulary of the Scrum Guide Expanded, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your perspective in the comments. And stay connected. Learning reinforcement.
It is the most common failure in modern development. A team ships secure, perfectly engineered code exactly to specification. But if no users actually adopt the feature and business metrics flatline, technical success is irrelevant. We succeeded at delivery, but failed at value creation. This diagram isolates the disconnect. Notice the stark boundary between the gray done output bridge and the glowing achieved outcome path. Releasing a government service to specification proves you produced an output, but not that citizens can complete it faster. Producing a high-quality technical output is a baseline requirement, but it is completely insufficient if it does not guarantee a successful real-world outcome. To understand why this happens so frequently, we have to look at the standard operating system most of these teams use, the 2020 Scrum framework. The traditional framework relies on 3 pillars to drive delivery: product backlog to product goal, sprint backlog to sprint goal, and increment to definition of done. That third pillar guarantees pre-release quality, but provides no structural mechanism to validate what happens after. This structural gap is why the Scrum Guide Expanded was developed. It is an elaboration, not a replacement, designed specifically to capture that miss-in lifecycle. The SGE introduces a precise vocabulary delta and an expanded architectural commitment to ground development in validated value rather than simple delivery. Before we update the architecture, we need to strip away the ambiguity of the word value and establish a precise semantic hierarchy for measuring results. This diagram visualizes 3 connected, concentric levels of value progression. Level 1 is output. This is strictly defined as what the team produced. Building and deploying a digital payment platform is a Level 1 output. Level 2 is outcome. This measures the behavioral change for users or stakeholders. More citizens actually choosing to pay their bills digitally is a Level 2 outcome. Level 3 is impact. This represents the macro-organizational result that follows, such as lower transaction costs and improved service efficiency. These levels are sequential dependencies, but they are not automatic. Shipping an output does not guarantee an outcome will follow. Confusing a Level 1 output for a Level 2 outcome is exactly how teams fall into the feature factory mindset, endlessly shipping code without measuring its effect. Because the target has expanded from code delivery to value validation, the definition of who actually does the work must expand along with it. The horizontal timeline from discover to validate maps a spectrum of professional capabilities, spanning from initial research through to the final validation of value. The expanded guide broadens the product developer accountability. It includes research, design, and value validation. The central question moves from who writes the code to who collectively possesses the capabilities to evolve the product. But even a highly capable team of product developers cannot achieve organizational impact if they operate in an isolated silo. This graphic maps the organizational ecosystem required for Agile success. We have the central Scrum team sphere, surrounded by a ring of external support functions. These are supporters. They are not a new Scrum role. They are specific enabling stakeholders, like legal, HR, and finance, who actively work to remove systemic organizational barriers. Achieving true outcomes requires cross-functional product capabilities, insulated by active organizational support. Now we reach the operational core of the Scrum Guide Expanded, translating these concepts into structural commitments. This architecture visualizes 4 distinct artifact commitment relationships driving the framework. The central 2020 commitments remain fully intact. The product backlog still links to the product goal, and the sprint backlog still links to the sprint goal. Over on the right, the traditional definition of done has been renamed to make its purpose explicit. It is now the definition of output done. Output done remains the strict due diligence and quality standard. It confirms the software increment was built properly. But the major addition sits on the far left. The product itself is elevated as a formal artifact, and its corresponding new commitment is the definition of outcome done. Outcome done is a product-level commitment. It requires observable, real-world evidence, whether quantitative or qualitative, proving that the intended benefits actually materialized. By adding this fourth pillar, the framework structurally forces teams to validate business value just as rigorously as they test code quality. Let's anchor this architecture to a concrete scenario, like a government team developing a digital public service. This cascading staircase traces the lifecycle of a single feature through the expanded framework. The broad product vision dictates the product goal, which drives the creation of the near-term sprint goal and the actual software increment. At the definition of output done step, we verify that the digital service is secure, tested, compliant, and usable. To see how intention is measured at the item level, we look at the contrast between acceptance criteria and outcome criteria under a feature ticket. Acceptance criteria verify the output, confirming the form validates and email send. Outcome criteria dictate the why, such as intending to reduce appointment processing time by 20%. Gathering the observable evidence that processing time actually dropped is the only way to satisfy the definition of outcome done. Explicitly writing outcome criteria for backlog items connects daily development tasks directly to organizational impact. Implementing these four pillars restructures the lifecycle of product development. This infinity loop illustrates the continuous logic of the Scrum Guide Expanded. We begin on the left, setting direction and building the increment to satisfy output done. The cycle continues on the right, observing the release, validating against outcome done, and adapting based on evidence. The SGE reframes the product lifecycle as a continuous loop, where every deployment becomes a catalyst for evidence-based adaptation. Throughout this evolution, empiricism, transparency, and the Scrum values remain the unbreakable foundation of the process. The text block on the right summarizes the guiding philosophy of the expanded framework. What we build matters. What it changes matters more. What value we realize matters most. The Scrum Guide Expanded provides the structural rigor required to replace operational assumptions with empirical evidence.